power is only power when it's recognized. The moment people stop caring, the illusion shatters. That's exactly what Donald Trump experienced on a night that started with nothing more than a craving for a cheeseburger. It was late, just past midnight, when the doors to the small roadside diner swung open. A bell jingled somewhere above, barely audible over the low hum of conversation and the clinking of cutlery against plates. The smell of sizzling bacon and over-brewed coffee filled the air, thick and familiar, the kind of scent that clung to the walls of places like this. Donald Trump stepped inside, flanked by two men in dark suits, his security detail. He was used to entering rooms and feeling the shift, eyes darting toward him, whispers floating through the air, people straightening in their seats, recognizing who he was and knowing that whether they loved him or hated him, he was a man who demanded attention. But this time nothing happened. A couple of truckers sat hunched over their plates of eggs and toast, too focused on their food to notice him. A group of college students in the far corner, faces glowing in the dim light of their phone screens, didn't even glance up. An old man at the counter stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, flipping through a wrinkled newspaper. Even the waitress at the front register, busy jotting something down in a notepad, barely acknowledged him. Trump cleared his throat. He took a step further into the diner, the hard soles of his loafers tapping against the linoleum floor, waiting for someone to react. Still nothing. He frowned, pushing past the confusion. Maybe they were intimidated. Maybe they just needed a moment to realize who had just entered their sad little establishment. His security team stepped forward, moving toward a booth in the middle of the diner. He slid in, leaning back against the cracked red leather, adjusting his suit jacket. One of his men positioned himself near the counter, scanning the room, while the other remained standing nearby, hands clasped in front of him. Still, no one looked. Trump exhaled sharply through his nose. He wasn't used to this. Wherever he went, people reacted. Whether with admiration or outrage, there was always a response. But this place? It was as if he were invisible. That was about to change. As he settled in, ready to remind the world of his presence, a figure appeared beside the table. A waitress scribbling in a notepad, the kind of person Trump had spent a lifetime ordering around without a second thought. She was middle-aged, her uniform slightly wrinkled, the name tag pinned to her chest reading Debbie. Without so much as glancing up, she pulled a pen from behind her ear and sighed. "What'll it be?" Trump smiled. Finally, Trump had spent decades commanding attention. The moment he walked into a room, people looked. They spoke his name in hushed tones, their eyes drawn to him as if pulled by some unseen force. He was the show, the event, the reason people tuned in. He had been greeted by world leaders, billionaires, celebrities, and even royalty. But here, in this little run-down diner off the highway, he was just another guy in a suit. Debbie, the waitress, didn't lift her gaze from her notepad. She stood there, pen tapping against the paper, waiting for an order. Trump blinked. This had to be a joke. "You know who I am, right?" he said, the familiar smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, assuming that recognition would finally dawn on her. Debbie finally glanced up, her expression completely neutral, unimpressed. "You want coffee or not?" For a brief moment, silence stretched between them. One of his security guards shifted slightly where he stood, but otherwise no one reacted. Trump's smirk faltered for the first time. She had to be messing with him. Maybe she was playing it cool, holding back the excitement of meeting him in person. It wouldn't be the first time. Some people got weird around powerful figures, trying too hard to act normal, like they weren't totally starstruck. So he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Come on, you've seen me on TV. You know who I am." Debbie shrugged, still tapping her pen against her pad. "You kinda look like that guy from Home Alone 2. Across the diner, a couple of heads turned. Trump's security detail stiffened slightly, anticipating his reaction. His smile tightened. "I'm Donald Trump." Debbie gave a slow, unimpressed nod. "Uh-huh." Silence. A few seconds passed, stretching just long enough to feel awkward. Trump cleared his throat. "I'll take a cheeseburger. Well done. Extra well done. No sesame seeds on the bun." Debbie jotted something down. "All right." Trump waited. She didn't say anything else. No acknowledgement, no reaction. She didn't even seem interested. He had given speeches in front of tens of thousands of people, had reporters hang on his every word. And yet here he was, sitting in a booth under buzzing fluorescent lights, talking to a woman who treated him like he was just another customer. Finally, he couldn't help himself. "That's it?" Debbie raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? You want me to roll out a red carpet or something?" From the counter, one of the truckers let out a small chuckle. The old man with the newspaper smirked. Trump straightened, his expression hardening. He didn't like this. He didn't like this at all. Debbie scribbled a final note and stuffed her notepad into the pocket of her apron. "I'll put your order in." And just like that, she walked away. Trump sat there, stunned, watching her disappear behind the counter. Something in the air had shifted. He could feel it. The tension, the quiet amusement from the other patrons. He wasn't just another guy ordering a burger anymore. He was a man who had been dismissed, shrugged off, treated like he wasn't special. And that was unacceptable. Trump had spent a lifetime getting exactly what he wanted. Whether it was in boardrooms, campaign rallies, or at the dinner table, he made demands, and people rushed to fulfill them. But tonight, in this little roadside diner, he was about to learn a hard truth. Some places, some people, didn't care who he was. As Debbie disappeared behind the counter, Trump leaned back in his seat, exhaling sharply. The quiet amusement in the room wasn't lost on him. He could hear the subtle chuckles, the barely restrained smirks from other diners. A few had even started whispering, heads tilted toward their phones as if ready to document whatever happened next. His security detail stood firm, trying to act like this wasn't a big deal. But Trump could feel it, the shift in control, the tightening grip of irritation curling inside him. He wasn't just another customer, he was Donald Trump. He drummed his fingers on the table, watching Debbie through the kitchen window. She was talking to the cook, gesturing with one hand, flipping a ticket onto the spinning order wheel, not even a glance in his direction. He had expected a certain level of respect, even deference. Instead, he got the same treatment as some trucker in a stained baseball cap, slumped over his plate of hash browns. Unacceptable. When Debbie finally returned with a fresh pot of coffee, Trump straightened in his seat. "Excuse me," he said, voice dripping with forced patience. Debbie barely glanced at him as she refilled a customer's mug. "Yeah?" Trump folded his hands together, giving her his best authoritative nod. "Listen, I don't think you understand. I like my burger a very particular way." Debbie blew a loose strand of hair from her forehead and turned to him. "Oh yeah?" He nodded. "Extra well done. No sesame seeds. Onions on the side, but they can't touch the plate." She smirked, pulling out her notepad and flipping to a blank page. "Let me get this straight. You want a burger cooked to the point of shoe leather, but you're worried about onion placement?" Trump's eyes narrowed. "That's how I like it." Debbie jotted something down with exaggerated effort. Trump leaned forward slightly. "And let's make sure it's on a bigger plate. Not one of those small, cheap ones." Debbie let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "Buddy, you get whatever plate we got." A snicker from the counter. The trucker, the old man, even one of the college kids, watching, waiting. Trump could feel the laughter tightening around him, squeezing. "This is terrible service," Trump muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Debbie snapped her notepad shut. "And yet here you are." The diner had settled into that comfortable hum again. The gentle clinking of forks on plates, the low murmur of conversation. But there was an undercurrent of attention now, an unspoken expectation hanging in the air. People were watching, even if they pretended not to. Trump had spent years controlling the narrative, but here, he was losing control fast. The door chimed as another customer entered. A teenage girl, probably no older than 16, walked in with her mother, both scanning the diner for an open booth. The girl's eyes flickered past Trump's table, then snapped back. Her phone was in her hand before she even realized it, her thumb moving quickly as she whispered something to her mother. The mother squinted toward Trump, then shrugged, clearly not as interested. But the girl? She was already typing. A few seconds later, another student at the corner booth glanced at his phone and let out a low whistle. "Yo," he whispered to his friend, "is that Trump?" The friend squinted, then leaned in. "No way!" Another second, another phone screen lighting up. And just like that, the dam broke. Someone took a picture, not obvious, just a quick, subtle snap under the table. A few whispers turned into murmurs, and then finally someone spoke up. "Hey, weren't you in that Home Alone movie?" Trump blinked. His lips parted slightly. He knew the moment he responded, the moment he acknowledged it, he'd be playing into their hands. Silence stretched for half a second too long. Then from across the room, another voice, this one older, gruffer. Yeah, you were the guy who told the kid how to get to the lobby." Laughter. Not overwhelming, but loud enough. Trump's jaw tightened. His security detail shifted, glancing at one another, waiting for instructions. But there was nothing to do, nothing to fix. He couldn't exactly demand they silence the entire room. Debbie returned, holding a plate in one hand and a small dish in the other. She slid the plate in front of him without ceremony. "1 cheeseburger, extra burnt, no sesame, onions in exile." The second dish landed with a quiet clink. Trump frowned. "What's this?" Debbie smirked. "Your onions. Special treatment. Just for you." Trump looked down. The onions weren't just on the side. They were sitting on a separate saucer, positioned at the farthest possible distance from the burger, as if they carried a deadly disease. The laughter grew louder. Someone at the counter actually clapped. Trump inhaled through his nose. He could feel his pulse beating in his temple. He had gone to war with the media, fought tooth and nail against political rivals, built an empire. But in this diner, on this night, he was losing to a waitress and a saucer of onions. Laughter still hung in the air, simmering just beneath the surface. Trump, staring at the plate in front of him, forced himself to focus. He was used to battles. He had fought the press, political opponents, lawsuits, but this was different. This was a humiliation he hadn't prepared for. He picked up the bun, inspecting the burger like it might contain a hidden insult. Too well done, too crispy. Trump let out a sharp breath through his nose, straightening in his seat. "This," he said, pausing for effect, "is not what I ordered." Debbie, who had been wiping down a nearby table, turned around and gave him a flat look. "You ordered a cheeseburger. That's a cheeseburger." Trump narrowed his eyes. "This is burnt," Debbie shrugged. "Extra well done, like you asked." The room had quieted again. People weren't just watching anymore. They were invested. This was entertainment, a free front-row seat to something they'd normally have to pay a cover charge for. One of his security guards, sensing his boss's rising frustration, stepped forward. "Sir, would you like to leave?" Trump ignored him. He wouldn't be chased out of a diner. He picked up the burger, took a single bite, then, after a long pause, placed it back on the plate, chewing slowly, his expression unreadable. Debbie watched. "Good?" he swallowed. "Terrible," Debbie smirked. "No refunds." More chuckles from the other customers. A trucker at the counter took a sip of his coffee, muttering, "Damn, I might have to start eating here more often." Trump pushed his plate away. "Check." Debbie gave a short nod and pulled out her notepad, tearing off the receipt. She walked over, casually dropping it on the table. Trump picked it up and squinted. $9.75, he frowned. "That was it? Doesn't even cover my tip," he muttered, fishing into his pocket. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill and held it up. Debbie didn't even reach for it. "We don't take big bills." A slow beat of silence. Trump looked up. "Excuse me?" She crossed her arms. "We don't take anything over a 20, too many counterfeits floating around." Someone at a booth near the window choked on their soda. Trump's eye twitched. Are you suggesting my money isn't real?" Debbie sighed. "I'm suggesting your ego ain't worth exact change." The laughter that followed was different now, louder, bolder. Someone actually slapped the table. Even one of the college kids who had barely looked up from his phone all night had his mouth open in shock. Trump's fingers tightened around the bill. His face, normally composed in moments of challenge, darkened. One of his guards sighed and pulled a 20 from his wallet, handing it over. Debbie took it, stuffed it into the register, and returned with the coins. She dropped them onto the table, where they landed with a loud clatter next to Trump's untouched onions. "Thanks for dining with us," she said, giving him a mockingly sweet smile, before turning on her heel and heading back toward the counter. Trump just stared. He was Donald Trump, and he had just been treated like a regular nobody. The moment the door closed behind him, the internet opened. The first video was posted just 5 minutes after he left. A 14-second clip of Trump sitting at the booth, staring at the saucer of onions like it had personally offended him. Caption: Donald Trump versus the Onion Conspiracy. 30 minutes later, the diner's Google reviews had been flooded with praise. "Shout out to Debbie. She deserves a raise and a medal. This place burns their burgers just right. Trump gives it a 0/10. I give it a 10/10. I drove 30 miles just to tip Debbie $50. By morning, the memes had taken over. A screenshot of Debbie, arms crossed, staring at Trump. Caption: Debbie 2024. A grainy close-up of Trump's face after being handed the saucer of onions. Caption: when life gives you onions but you wanted oranges. But the worst part? The part that would stick with him? The news cycle. CNN ran it as Trump finally meets an opponent he can't defeat, a waitress. Fox News called it Small-Town America Disrespects Former President, a disgraceful display. MSNBC labeled it Trump Crumbles. Over a cheeseburger, what this means for his public image. By noon, Debbie had been interviewed by 3 local radio stations. By evening, she was on a talk show. "You really didn't know who he was?" the host asked, grinning. Debbie shrugged. "I mean, I had a guess, but it was more fun pretending I didn't." The audience roared. Trump's team scrambled to control the narrative. His advisors sat around a long mahogany table, their faces set in grim expressions as the video played on a loop in the background. One of them cleared his throat. "Sir, we need to get ahead of this. Maybe a statement." Trump, scrolling through his phone furiously, finally stopped. He opened Truth Social, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Fake news, setup, liberal trap. He stared at the words for a moment. Then slowly, he deleted them. He set his phone down, exhaling sharply, jaw tightening. For the first time in his entire career, he hesitated. This wasn't just another bad headline. This wasn't another scandal he could brush off. This was something worse. This was a joke. And jokes never go away. Inside Trump Tower, The air was thick with frustration. The war room was filled with advisors, campaign managers, and communications strategists, all seated around a massive mahogany table. The massive screen at the front of the room flickered between news reports, trending tweets, and YouTube reaction videos. On one side of the screen, a still frame of Trump sitting in the diner, staring at the saucer of onions. On the other, Debbie, arms crossed, delivering what had already become an iconic line. "I'm suggesting your ego ain't worth exact change," Trump scowled, gripping his phone like it was personally responsible for the disaster. One of his advisors, a younger man in a navy suit, cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, the story isn't dying down. It's trending across all platforms. Memes, reaction videos, late-night hosts." "I know," Trump snapped, tossing his phone onto the table. "I've been watching it all damn day." His campaign manager, a stone-faced man who had survived more than his fair share of PR disasters, exhaled through his nose. "We need a response. Fast. If we let this sit, it'll become a narrative." Trump leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "We attack. Say it was a setup, the deep state, liberal waitresses." One of his media consultants hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect, the footage is everywhere. Even Fox News is covering it. Spinning this as a political attack might not work this time." Trump's jaw tightened. "So what do we do? Let some waitress make a fool out of me?" Another advisor spoke up. "Sir, we make her the story. Dig into her background. Find something, an old tweet, a past donation, anything we can use to discredit her." Trump perked up slightly. Now this was familiar territory. "Yeah," he muttered, nodding. "Yeah, let's see how she likes it." Within hours, pro-Trump media figures flooded the airwaves. "Who is Debbie?" became the newest angle. "Is she a radical leftist?" one anchor speculated. "Does she have ties to the media elite?" another suggested. "The disrespect toward our former president is disgraceful," a commentator fumed. "This wasn't just a waitress doing her job. This was a targeted humiliation attempt." But there was a problem. Debbie wasn't taking the bait. When reporters showed up at the diner, she didn't give them some panicked soundbite. She didn't apologize or try to explain herself. She just kept working. When asked for a comment, she smirked and said, "I gave the guy a burger. Didn't know that was a national security threat." And just like that, the internet loved her even more. A week later, the story should have died. But it hadn't. If anything, it had gotten bigger. Debbie had been offered talk show appearances. Twitter was flooded with people joking that they'd drive cross-country just to tip her in 20s. Even the diner had gone viral, with thousands of people leaving 5-star reviews based solely on her now iconic one-liner. As for Trump, he tried to move on. But the thing about the internet is, it doesn't forget. Every time he tweeted, someone replied with a picture of Debbie crossing her arms. Every time he made a speech, someone in the crowd held up a sign that read "No big bills" in bold black letters. Every time he tried to reclaim control of the narrative, someone brought up the onions. The final blow came at an event in Florida, where he was dining at an upscale steakhouse. The second he walked in, a murmur spread through the room. A waiter approached his table, handing him a menu with a barely contained smirk. Trump glanced at him suspiciously. "What?" The waiter shrugged. "Just letting you know, sir, we don't take big bills." The entire restaurant erupted in laughter. Trump's face burned red. That night, back at his residence in Mar-a-Lago, he sat in silence, his phone untouched beside him. The television played a news segment recapping the diner incident for the 1,000th time. The footage rolled, Debbie smirking, flipping her notepad shut, refusing to play into his ego. Trump inhaled sharply and picked up his phone. He opened Truth Social, his fingers hovering over the screen. He typed, "Liberal hoax, fake story, total setup." He stared at the words for a long moment. Then slowly, he deleted them. For the first time in his career, he had no comeback. Some battles, he realized, you just can't win. So, what do you think? Was this just another viral moment? Or was this a glimpse into what happens when power meets indifference? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories that shake up the narrative. See you in the next one.